IBS being a disorder of the gut-brain interaction is that there's a miscommunication or a dysregulation between the connection of the gut and the brain. Our default should be rest and digest, so it's literally in the name. So when we're in survival mode, frustration isn't the environment that's conducive to health and well-being, because frustration actually causes more stress. And then we're kind of back around the cycle again, more stress. Burnout is something that happens when our nervous system's overloaded for such a long time. Sometimes I've had patients say to me, that's the first time I've relaxed like that in my whole life. Neurons that fire together wire together, right? So neurons that recognize, hey, we're doing this same thing over and over. We're going to make this more efficient and we're going to wire together so that it's a pathway, which is the more you do it, the more you practice driving, the easier it becomes.
Hey, before we dive in, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. It means so much to me. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to hit subscribe and join us on this journey. You see, we created BioBelly because gut health changed everything for me and the people I love. I watched my best friend Ankit battle ulcerative colitis and my aunt struggle with IBS-C, and seeing their pain showed me how broken the system really is. There's so much confusion out there and so little care that feels personal or hopeful. BioBelly exists to change just that, with science you can trust, education that empowers you, and solutions that actually help. So if you believe in making gut health simple, compassionate, and effective, I'd love for you to subscribe and be part of this movement with us. And for little daily gut health tips and encouragement, you can always find me on TikTok at the Gut Guy. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the BioBelly Show, where we explore the mind, body, and gut connection with some of the most inspiring voices in health and healing. Today, I'm joined by Claire Jones, a self-esteem therapist and clinical hypnotherapist, and the founder of That Health Hub. Claire specializes in helping women in healthcare break free from stress, self-doubt, burnout, and guide them from exhausted to empowered. She has this incredible gift of helping women rise into their worth, passion, and purpose, and combine self-esteem work with the powerful tools of psychotherapy and hypnotherapy. I am super excited for this conversation because burnout and stress don't just affect our mental health, they deeply impact our gut, our immune system, and how we show up in daily life. Claire, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Trishi. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And yeah, I really appreciate it. It's always a wonderful opportunity to talk about these important things. They're really affecting people in their day, like you say, in their day-to-day life. So yeah, let's do this.
Alrighty. So Claire, I would love if we can start with your personal journey. What led you into this work of self-esteem therapy and hypnotherapy?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And look, I'm a psychotherapist and clinical hypnotherapist, as you mentioned at the now, but that's not where the journey started. So I've been a healthcare professional for a long time, and I was a speech pathologist by trade. That's my sort of how I entered into healthcare, and the journey into healthcare started, quite young. My mum was ill when she had a car accident when I was about 10, and so, I spent some time caring for her and sort of really realized that, uh, I was drawn to wanting to support people and help people. And from there, I did work experience at school in the healthcare realm, and then, yeah, decided on speech pathology as my
Oh,
trade, and did that for a decade in acute healthcare. So, I loved that. It was fantastic, it was challenging, I got to work with amazing people, and I got to do some really impactful work. And then I saw though that there was So we obviously were working with patients, but I also saw that there were a lot of needs on the staff side of things as a
Wow.
healthcare professional, the challenges that go with that. And so I wanted to focus on that side rather than the patient side as such. And healthcare professionals have health issues too. And so then, yeah, restudied in psychotherapy and clinical hypnotherapy, and yeah, just feel really passionate about self-esteem comes up a lot, and it's a barrier for people in terms of living their
Mhm.
best life. It often holds people back. And so I feel really passionately about that and women's health and supporting women and men to, reconnect with themselves and get to know themselves so that they can, yeah, live their life without any barriers, without any restrictions.
Wow, wow. And it's so interesting because it's really those who are providing the care that usually need care the most, right? And it's so interesting because those frontline workers are nurses, are doctors, the women in healthcare. I feel like sometimes they are the ones that aren't given that attention they truly deserve because they are again in that fire of just stress and chaos and having to around the clock be there for so many patients. It really does take a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Was there any turning point specifically in life where you realized that burnout and self-worth were at the heart of so many health struggles?
Oh, that's a good I think you notice different things along the journey, but I think probably my own personal experience with burnout was a big turning point. And so as a healthcare professional, we go into these professions because we want to serve and we want to support. But I don't think we're quite ready for, like you say, that the fact that demand always outstrips supply, that there's never enough time in the day. They're high pressure environments. You're making, you know, important clinical decisions, working with big teams, and that I have to admit caught up with me when I was a young healthcare professional, and then I think I did have a little bit of break and went into private business and then came back into healthcare, and it was I think that break and coming back made me see that it's still a big
Yeah.
problem, and that people are working incredibly long hours, they're stretched, they're not lunching, they're not going to the toilet when they need to, they're talking about patient care and client care during their lunch breaks, and it made me realize that we need to do something about this and we can't wait for the system to
Yeah.
change. The demand is always going to outstrip supply. So I think empowering ourselves to upskill in this space and to, perform because we all want to make an impact, but also to remember that we have to take care of ourselves first. And yeah, I really want to support other people to learn those skills. I don't want them to have to learn the hard way like what I did, right?
Absolutely.
So that's probably a turning point, having a little bit of a break and then coming back in, especially post-COVID, and doing some clinical hypnotherapy with my colleagues and seeing how much they needed it too.
Love it. And in this time where you are consulting so many clients, or just healthcare workers that are seeking your advice on how they can kind of get back on track, just mentally and kind of I guess reignite their love with their work in a healthy way. Have you noticed like this idea of self-doubt and low self-esteem feed into the cycle of stress, exhaustion, and even physical symptoms like gut issues?
Absolutely. And so, when you actually speak to people, it's a very personal experience, right? And sometimes I think we can make this assumption that because somebody is high performing and super intelligent, which is, let's face it, most healthcare professionals are. However, when you sort of dig under the surface a little bit and maybe you start talking to them, you realize that they question their decisions. They often struggle to ask for help, to set boundaries for themselves, and then you can imagine in a really busy setting like healthcare that if you're not able to do those things, if you can't ask for help, if you can't delegate, if you can't set boundaries, if you're not looking after yourself, it's like the perfect storm for stress, which, chronic stress then, of course, leads to burnout and your nervous system's overloaded, which then, for long enough, then we end up starting to see that, affecting our bodies. So, yeah, that's kind of the cycle
Right.
that happens, and we need to do something about it.
And Claire, I really feel like you are. Specifically, I wanted to talk about this tool that you've made for checking burnout risk. Um, I, I wanted to,
Mm.
hear a bit more about it, and also learn maybe what you have learned from seeing so many women who are taking that assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I developed the Burnout Risk Scorecard, and it's basically an opportunity for people to get some figures, and most people have a feeling of exhaustion and burnout, but they're not really sure. Often they're too busy to even check, and so it's a tool where they can go and take a short quiz and actually check in with themselves. They get a score at the end, how at risk of
Mhm.
burnout are they? And that's based on how they answer the questions. And I think that just gives them something tangible to say, okay, it's time to do something about
Right.
this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it specifically, those signs of burnout. What are the hidden signs of burnout that most people overlook, like, but that you notice right away in your clients?
Absolutely. I mean, burnout is something that happens when our nervous
Yeah.
system's overloaded for such a long time. And so we do start to see this manifest physically, particularly in the gut. So often we do see, issues like irritable bowel syndrome. Sometimes it's hair loss for people, sometimes it's skin conditions. And so they're the signs that often we look for, but often just complete fatigue. And sometimes, if that goes on for long enough, it can be disconnection from socially, from your
Mhm.
community, from family, even, and also disconnection from our purpose at work. And I see that a lot in healthcare professionals. And I think it's such a shame. We desperately need to retain our healthcare professionals to continue to provide this important service, but if we don't look after ourselves, then there is no patient
Right.
care. I think it's looking further up the chain, right? Like, how can we provide excellent care to our patients and clients if we're not putting our oxygen mask on first?
Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of people, they actually have, because you were mentioning IBS, and since we are talking about stress and trauma, slowly something that people are starting to hear about is this idea of gut-directed hypnotherapy. We were talking about it a bit earlier as
Yeah.
well. How do you explain what it really is and how it helps with stress and healing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I think firstly, there's a lot of emerging research now. There's a really solid evidence base for hypnotherapy, clinical hypnotherapy, especially in
Mhm.
the gut space, which is fantastic. And I do think it is becoming more and more recognized. Even the fact that I do clinical hypnotherapy as a part of a public health service. So I also work at Alfred Health as part of their functional gut disorders team. And so I think that represents that it is becoming, there's more awareness around its effectiveness, and it's a great additional tool to be able to support people with functional gut issues. And so, you know, what's the link between stress and the gut, and why does clinical hypnotherapy help? Well, I guess that kind of takes us back to, well, what is irritable bowel
Mhm.
syndrome, and how is that perhaps different to structural gut problems? And so, to explain that, I guess we need to talk about that IBS is a disorder of the gut brain interaction. And so, what that means is there is no mechanical or structural problem with the gut. And so, we have to manage it differently. And so, this is hard for patients and clients to get their
Right.
heads around, right? Because they have very real physical symptoms, and often the test results come back normal. And so it can make them feel like they're, not being heard, that their symptoms aren't real, but that's not the case at all. It's just the answer doesn't lie where they think it
Mm.
lies. And so, you know, IBS being a disorder of the gut brain interaction is that there's a miscommunication or a dysregulation between the connection of the gut and the brain. So, the gut brain axis. And so that is, I sort of liken it like a superhighway. That's how I explain it to my patients is I say there's a really strong connection between the brain and your gut. And it's a highway and the communication goes both ways. So whatever's happening in the gut can affect the brain, and whatever's happening in the brain and the mind can affect the gut. And so when they begin to understand how their body works, then we can start to unpack, okay, well, what's happening with our mind and the brain, and how is that then influencing our gut? And we talk about the stress cycle and the stress response cycle, and how the fact that chronic stress overloads the system. We're not, often these days, what most of my patients, essentially are living in survival mode. And so they're chronically in a state of fight or flight. And that is the opposite to health
Right.
and well-being. Essentially our default should be rest and digest. So it's literally in the name. Uh, so when we're in survival mode, our body is literally preparing to either fight or flee
Well,
from a bear or a tiger, or how when our system was designed, it was designed in that context. Different these days. These days the stresses are tricky conversations, work deadlines, traffic, financial burdens, those types of things. But when a stress response is triggered and we're in fight or flight or survival mode, digestion is not the focus of the system of the body. It's put on the back burner. Uh, there's reduced blood flow to the gut, there's reduced motility in the gut because all of our resources are being
right.
diverted elsewhere. And so you can imagine then if we spend a great deal of time because we're chronically stressed and burnt out and we're not prioritizing our health and our needs, that if we're constantly in survival mode, well, then it's your digestion and your sleep is likely to be affected. And that's what I see a lot. And so that's the link between stress in the gut and stress and IBS. And yeah, so hard to
Right.
unpack a big, but that's sort of the crux of it, if that makes
Absolutely, and
sense.
you unpacked it very well. I appreciate the explanation of IBS and how, this I mean, of course, like, how are you supposed to be able to digest food when evolutionarily your body's thinking, "Okay, we're running from a bear." I mean, it's it's
Absolutely.
it's,
Yeah.
like an, impossible feat, and specifically, I wanted to learn if you could share an example of how hypnotherapy helped a client move from exhaustion to empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is my favorite
Love it.
part. So, usually we do about 6 sessions of hypnotherapy, and we can make some really good progress in quite a short space of time. And so one example I have is one, young lady, and, she had a tricky time in COVID and had a very stressful, traumatic experience, and shortly after that had developed IBS-C.
Mm,
And all of the tests came back. She had all of the tests. And I think uh, I would like to let's chat about teamwork and the importance of having, a medical professional diagnose IBS, right? Because I can't do my job
right.
without that confirmation that we are dealing with a functional gut issue rather than something structural. That's an important distinction. So she had had all the tests, and she had met a lot of the other team members, dietitians, gastroenterologists. And so, where we start is the very first session, we talk about what IBS actually is. And we spend a great deal of time on that because I think it's really important. Often they have had it explained, but they still don't really understand it. And I think in order for them to move on from this, and overcome it and at least get to a point where they can manage it, they need to understand that it's a functional issue, that the issue is the connection between the brain and the gut. And that's why we're going to spend a great deal of time doing that. And that's why I'll say to them often, that's why you're sitting with a clinical hypnotherapist and not with a
Right. Sure.
surgeon, right? So the reason is we have to work on the gut brain connection and everything else that influences that. So the very first session is we want to focus on reestablishing that, becoming
Mhm.
aware of it, reestablishing it, and also just giving their nervous system an opportunity to get into a deep state of calm. And so for someone who's been living in survival mode or fight or flight mode for many different reasons, sometimes I've had patients say to me, "That's the first time I've relaxed like that in my whole
Well,
life." And so this is the power of clinical hypnosis. And look, it's not as woo-woo and mystical as I think some people might think. You know, we've all seen things on the TV, but clinical hypnosis is really just guiding somebody into a state of focused attention and a deeply relaxed state. And what we know is when someone is in that deeply relaxed state, also called a trance state, I think it needs a rebrand because it
yeah.
it sounds even the word trance sounds like a like woo woo. But when we know we once you get into that deeply relaxed state, your brain and your mind are more open to the power of suggestion. And so what we do is the therapeutic themes that we talk about in clinical hypnosis are in line with, you know, down regulating your nervous system, taking responsibility for your situation, and that's kind of the maybe the difference too between my style of everybody's style
Sure.
is quite different, but I would say that mine's quite strategic, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But so yeah, the very first session is just giving their mind and body a chance to reconnect and for them to some visuals as well around that visualization around reconnecting the brain and the gut and also just down regulating the nervous system so that we can move them out of fight or flight into rest and digest and we start there.
Awesome. And so right afterwards, like if we can dive in a bit deeper, those next sessions, sessions 2 to 6, how do they look?
Yeah, it's a great question. I might take this opportunity to explain that. So I'm a strategic psychotherapist, and so I know that you've had some excellent hypnotherapists on your podcast as well already, which is fantastic. And I think it's important to point out that we all kind of have slightly different styles, and so sometimes it might be that clinical hypnotherapy is just the
Right.
vehicle, right? It's just
Right.
the tool. What we deliver in hypnosis is the
Yes.
important part, right? So the hypnosis itself, of course, down regulates the nervous system, but therapeutically, it's whatever model you're using. So for some people, it's CBT. For myself, it's strategic psychotherapy. And what that means is that we believe underlying everything is a process. And so once we understand that process and we can break it down step by step, then we can start to disrupt some of that old patterning and pathways and processes in the brain. And then we can create new pathways that are more in line with their health goals. And so I guess liken it to often we don't think about it, often we're on autopilot. But this morning when you got dressed, if you put your shoes on before you put your socks on, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
It doesn't, right? It doesn't work. So we often do things in a particular sequence, so a process, a pattern, and underlying everything we do, how we run stress, how we run anxiety, there are patterns and processes, and so that's part of what we do in the first session as well. Obviously, is doing a thorough assessment and understanding what the person across from me, what their patterns are, and then once I understand that, then I can work to break those patterns down, and then we can start to reconstruct new ones. So we do a lot. We cover a lot in the first 6 sessions, but I talk about topics like, neuroplasticity and, self-compassion, our locus of control. These are really important things. Often we feel when we're struggling with IBS that this problem is outside
Mm,
of us and that we cannot influence it. And that's incredibly disempowering, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, that's why we feel
Yes.
stuck, is because we don't feel like we're not getting any answers from the tests, and we still got our symptoms, and we think, this problem is outside of us. So a big part of empowering someone is explaining what that is, how we actually do have a lot of power within ourselves to influence our situation, how much we pay attention to certain symptoms, lots of things. And so each session we cover off different psychoeducation topics like that. And then we also put them into the hypnosis as well so that we're consciously talking about it, but also unconsciously we're helping to reshape that patterning throughout the sessions. So, yeah, I guess in a typical session, we would do sort of find out how the week's gone, what things are they struggling with. We would do some psychoeducation on a topic like locus of control or self compassion, uh, those types of things. And then we would do a hypnosis session. Then I also get them to do my patients to do tasks in between. And that includes listening to the recording every day if they can. And also, it might be practicing some sort of new skill like breathing, for example. That's a great tool to downregulate the nervous system. And so I can teach them a specific technique on how to do that. So that is kind of how each of the 6 sessions goes. And so we cover a
Right,
lot,
right.
but it's really effective. And because you get a recording, I often will encourage, depending on how much progress we've made in those 6 sessions, I'll encourage my clients to go through another round themselves independently, listen to the recordings again, because they've often come so far. And I said it's really interesting to go back and listen to the first session again. You hear often completely different messaging because you've learned so much and you've come
Mm,
so far. I find that really helpful. So an example of that would be I had a client email me just last week actually, and yeah, she started the journey very stressed, had a traumatic experience, was really debilitating, wasn't going out. It was affecting her self-esteem. She wanted to change careers.
right.
She was stuck, and got an email last week to say that she did 6 rounds with me. She went and listened to the recordings again for 6 weeks, and she said that she's completely free of IBS now. She can eat whatever she wants, including onions, so they were previously trigger foods, and, she said, "I'm living my best life."
Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome. It really prompts me.
It's
I get
amazing.
very curious though. These specific the recordings. What is it that
Mm.
they're hearing that is sparking this transformation in them where you're able to tap into that calm and peace within?
It's a great question. It's a layered response,
Right.
as you can imagine. We're so complex, and I think like you said earlier before we started jumped on, is that there's actually so much we're to learn about the mind body
Right.
connection, right? And I think that's important to acknowledge as well. But it's layered. So just listening to the recordings,
Yeah.
just that, even if you weren't to pay any attention to the therapeutic themes that I weave throughout those, is 20 to 25 minutes that you're allowing your nervous system to downregulate for the day.
Well.
I'll often encourage my patients to start the day with that, because I think to tie into what you said earlier as well is that most of the time, not all, but a lot of the time, my patients and clients with IBS tend to be people who put other needs above their
Mm,
own. Healthcare workers, teachers, those people that work in service, people who are quite selfless. And what that means is then they're emptying their emotional
yes.
tanks every day and they leave nothing left for themselves. So what I say is I want you to try and set your alarm for 30 minutes earlier and I want you to listen to this first. This is it's a gift that you can give to yourself at the start of each day. And so they start their day down regulating their nervous system with the hypnosis, and then they've done something for themselves
Yes.
first, sets the intention for the day. So there's the hypnosis component, and then there are the themes. And so therapeutic themes, self-compassion, some often will with IBS, we spend too much time inside our own minds. We also often we avoid things, we might project into the future, so we address all of that throughout the hypnosis sessions as well. And that is much easier to do when we're in a relaxed state as opposed to what we often see in a conscious state, which is because you're stressed, it changes the way you process information. And often I'll see highly anxious patients in clinic who aren't able to absorb the information
Mhm.
because they're still in
Right.
survival mode. Because we can get them into that deeply relaxed, focused state, their mind is more open to the power of suggestion, and then we can utilize those therapeutic themes, and so that what we're doing is we're laying down new
Mhm.
neural pathways. It's a bit like, which is why we talk about neuroplasticity. So the first time you drove a
Yeah.
car, Trishy, how was that?
It was, stressful for my mom, let's just say.
Yes, mine too. Exactly, and you having to be so conscious
Yeah.
about it, right? You're thinking about what are my hands are doing? What are my feet doing? And you can imagine if that's the level of energy and brain power it took to drive a car every single time you would drive, you
It would
you
overload, yeah.
it wouldn't be
Yeah,
functional.
exactly.
Yeah, completely. So the brain's really clever, and I'm not a neurologist, so
Right.
just but, I'll explain it how I explain to my patients. The brain's really clever, and neurons that fire together wire together, right? So neurons that recognize, "Hey, we're doing this same thing over and over. We're gonna make this more efficient, and we're going to wire together so that
Mhm.
it's a pathway," which is the more you do it, the more you practice driving, the easier it becomes. And then now when you get in the car, do you have to think about what your feet are doing and what your hands are doing or
It's
any of
like
that?
second nature. Yeah.
No. Second nature is it's what I like to call
Right.
autopilot. And so those pathways are laid down in the brain to make it more efficient. The tricky part about this is the brain doesn't decide whether or not that's a good thing for you or a bad thing for you. It's just thinking we're doing this a lot and we're going to wire it this pathway so that it's easier for you. So the problem with that is that we can also the way we process stress or the way we respond to stress or and the way we run anxiety, pathways also develop. And so that's the patterning and the processes that we need to address and break down and establish new neural pathways. And the way we do that is how did you get better at driving?
Practice. Yeah.
Practice.
Yeah.
All right. So that is what the recordings are for. It's to practice, 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 and, thankfully, it's just a really nice, calming, and relaxing experience as well, but that is why I get my patients and clients to listen to why I give recordings, but also why I get them to listen to them is because they're forming new pathways each time they do it.
Wow. Love it. Love it. And I love how you really clearly underlined that you are a strategist, that it's like in that
Mhm.
initial call, you're kind of feeling out the waters and trying to figure out, okay, what's the personality of this of my patient in front of me, and what work do they do? What is like their tendency in holding stress and maybe even expressing themselves. I see it time and time again, even
Yeah.
my loved ones, I was talking about it earlier. There are some loved ones of mine who they might have a thought that they want to express, but they just won't do it. And what happens is, eh, long term, it's weakening relationships between them and other people. But along with that, they
Mhm.
stop, like that voice that tells them, "Hey, talk for yourself." It starts to go lower and lower and lower. And so I really
Agreed.
resonate with this idea of neural pathways, and how
Yes.
we start like doing the same. We start having these tendencies of doing things in a certain way, and that can be to our detriment as well. Like, we can just
That's
keep
right.
hoarding and
Yeah.
hoarding emotions, and and that affects our health.
Absolutely, and I see that a lot in my clinical work as well, is that might be some of the patterning that we unearth, and so that's why that assessment part and the strategic part is important at the start. I don't tend to get into the why because everybody's why story is unique, but the how is often quite similar, that processing. And so, I had a patient the other day who, arguably on the outside is very successful, but also has suppressed a lot of their
Right.
their emotions and hasn't dealt with stress. They for lots of reasons, they have tended to bury it and not
Mm,
talk about it or not seek support with it, and they're struggling with their gut. They're struggling with IBS, and so we need to. That's a pattern, exactly like you pointed out. That's a process that underlies how they manage stress, how they manage their emotions, and so what we need to do then is first step first is we can't change anything we're not
right.
aware of, right?
Absolutely.
So creating that awareness, and I often explain it as though you're doing a lot of us do things that are on autopilot. Those pathways have been laid down, well trodden for years. And if we're not even conscious of it, then we can't possibly change it. And so part of what I try to do is bring conscious awareness to those unconscious patterns running in the background and connect the dots. And it's a really powerful process. Often see the kind of the light bulb moment that goes on for my patients and my clients. And when you ask the right questions, you can support them to put the pieces together. And they might say, "Oh, I just started out of the blue. All of a sudden I just woke up and I started experiencing diarrhea or bloating or pain." It's never out of the
Right.
blue. It's not. That's not how it works. But they just haven't connected the dots between patterns that they've been running and what they're experiencing, and so that's a really important first step, and creating conscious awareness around that, then we can start once we understand that, right, we can start disrupting it and doing things differently, learn different skills, educate ourselves, and then that's when we start to see things really improve.
Wow. Earlier you were mentioning how a client of yours, they had this intolerance to onions, and once they went through these sessions, all of a sudden they felt like onion suited them, and it was they were able to eat the foods that they weren't able to beforehand. It's interesting to me because when I got into this idea of learning about gut health, I got in without the context, which is so crucial, without the context of this mind, body, spirit connection. And when I heard
Mm.
about, okay, there's a food sensitivity, my one dimensional mindset was more of, okay, there's a food sensitivity, meaning that there are enzymes in the body that there's a lack of enzymes in the body that can digest that certain food, and so maybe a certain type of food is seeping into the gut lining, and that's causing inflammation in the body.
Mm.
Like in a very biological, scientific mindset. But all of a sudden, when I hear amazing success stories about how um, our tolerance can increase with respect to our mental state and our self esteem. It really blows my mind.
It's amazing. It is. And look, there are conditions, like you say, where that follow what you described as that process of, co actual
Yeah.
issues in the gut. However, we know with IBS and functional gut disorders, because the issue is the gut-brain connection, that mind-body connection, what's happening there is the enteric nervous system, which is the gut's own nervous system. Also, I know a lot of people are calling it the second brain now, but what happens is the sensory nerves in that system have become hypersensitive.
Right.
So this is where the function part comes in. So on the tests, you can't see that. It's in the day to day. And so what's happening there is the messaging coming in from the food is being interpreted in the wrong way. It's sending, hypersensitive messaging in the gut. So it's being received in the gut incorrectly, and also it can be processed in the brain incorrectly. So there's two
Right.
layers of that as well. And we call that visceral hypersensitivity, where the sensory nerves in the gut are hypervigilant, let's say. And so that can happen for lots of reasons, but overloading the nervous system, chronic exposure to stress, anxiety is often what I see as what's happened and can attribute to that. So once we can downregulate the nervous system using the hypnosis, the psychoeducation and the skills that we teach, then what we see is that sensitivity start to dissipate. And so then, we're starting to regulate the nervous system better. And so those nerves start to process often when as they have previously. Everything's just the whole system starts to calm down, and then, yeah, they can tolerate it.
Love it. And if I could dive a little bit deeper, Claire, up in these recordings that we want to listen to first thing in the morning to, give that time to ourselves, is it or is it a narration where we are listening to affirmations of how we should view us to kind of reverse those neural pathways and hopefully build more positive ones? Or is it more of just calming our body, down regulating the nervous system through, walking someone through a calming scenario?
Again, it's a mixture of all
Gotcha.
of those things. So, as I said, everybody's style is a little bit different, but for me, I will use a mixture of visualizations. Everything's centered around the gut and always comes back to the gut, but I usually cover off at least two therapeutic themes, whether that be avoidance, whether that be self-compassion, whether that be locus of control, the impact of stress, uh, and I'll also utilize visualization and
Oh,
metaphor in the language that the patient uses. And this is where the important thing is that you listen to your clients and patients, is that you need to meet them where
right.
they're at, and you need to use language that's relevant to them, because for them to relate to the information, even subconsciously, they need to recognize it as like, you can't hypnotize somebody who's decided then they don't want to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there has to be the people who I find do the best in this process and get the results that they want are people who come with an open mind and are curious and are intrigued by the process, and that also do the work. So that's the other big thing, is my client who was able to, let's call it, put her IBS in
Mhm.
remission, was someone who was curious and listened to the recordings every single day, did the strategies I taught her, and went away with information about how her body works. And this is what I say at the end of this process: I want you to really understand how your brain and your body works, the connection between the brain and the gut. I want you to have 6 hypnosis recordings that you can use from now on as much as you like. And I also want you to go with a toolbox of strategies that we know work to support
Yeah.
stress, to support
Oh,
rumination, overthinking. And another big theme is to rebuild
mhm.
trust with their
Yeah.
bodies, right? Trishi, a lot of people who have IBS are frustrated with their
Yeah.
bodies. And of course, we get it. But unfortunately, that frustration isn't the environment that's conducive to health and well-being, because frustration actually causes more stress. And then we're kind of back around the cycle again, more stress, the system's overloaded, it's hypervigilant, and then that exacerbates your symptoms. So we need to calm the system. And then we also need to create reconnection with the body, and that this is nobody's fault, that this is real, but that trust begets more trust.
Right.
Right. So it's relearning to actually listen, because what happens, people become disconnected from their minds and their bodies because of external pressure, life circumstances, lots
Right.
of reasons. So I actually support my clients throughout the whole process to start listening again. taking ourselves off to the toilet. A lot of people with IBS develop coping behaviors like, all right, well, look, I'm going out. I must go now, and I've got to go 3 times to the toilet, and to try and prepare in case I get stuck. You know, however, that's not listening to
Right.
your body. We have to reconnect in that way, and the more we listen, then the more we learn to trust, and that's how we tend to get
Love it.
results.
Love it, Claire. And once you do feel that your patients are they're on the other side of the tunnel, let's just say, and after those 6 days, they have reconnected with themselves at a much higher level, and they're slowly starting to learn about, they're well, starting to relearn the importance of taking care of themselves, and, having
Mm,
a, just as you said, mentality of taking care of yourself to be able to take care of others, oxygen mask, putting your
right.
oxygen mask on first. Afterwards, after that patient has done those 6 days, what are the tools that equipping with these clients to ensure that they are constantly building that self-esteem and resilience day to day afterwards?
It's a great question. And look, I think it's very individualized. I think, sometimes all it takes for some people is they have a 6 week block, and then they'll go on to listen to the recordings again afterwards. And that's enough to get them, they're starting to get results by that stage. And so that reinforces, the changes that they're making. But sometimes people do require a bit more hands-on support and counseling and encouragement
Mhm.
ongoing, as I said, for lots of different reasons, different backgrounds, different histories, different complexities. And so some people don't, I have to be honest, some people don't go on to continue the work. And I think the important thing as a therapist and a clinician is just to be, I think I said earlier, just meet them where they're at, right? It it's a very personal journey, and sometimes we may have to go through this experience or be supported ongoing or, again, which is
Right.
okay. That's just how life sometimes. That's what I say to my clients, and so some people go on and they sort of are able to take the bull by the horns, and they go on and independently continue to implement and continue to grow and continue to work on themselves and continue to improve their health. Some people get the results and they kind of just tick along at that, they're happy with that and kind of just maintain it. And then for lots of reasons, other people might need ongoing support or need to come back to it, and that's okay as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so interesting because I am slowly starting to there's a part where I want to share a little bit about what I'm doing as well and how we can
Love
learn
to
how
hear it.
I can
Yeah.
learn from you and hopefully create a holistic sort of haven for people with gut issues so they can find refuge. We're actually creating a platform called CareBiome. It's in the works right now. It's actually the first
Right.
time I've said it to someone. It's been very
Yeah, great.
like within the team trying to figure out how we can make strides towards building a online platform where people specifically with
Mhm.
functional issues like IBS they can find refuge in having a network of
Brilliant.
professionals. So of course, like after hearing from what you're saying, that first step is usually excluding any structural or extreme health issues to make sure it is truly a functional problem.
Yeah, and I think, even if it is a functional problem, it still can be extreme in terms of
Absolutely.
the impact on their quality of life. But yeah, wholeheartedly, that's super important for clinicians like myself to work as a part of a team, and that I think this can be. So I love the idea of having a central point, because I think that's what sometimes we try to do is we try to isolate the brain and the heart and the lungs and the gut as
Right.
separate things. And of course, that isn't how it works for a person. They're all interconnected. And so, as clinicians and therapists, we need to be acutely aware of that and also mindful of our scope of practice, where we need to to holistically manage and support someone who's got a functional gut disorder, that requires, like you say, a team of people, a gastroenterologist, gut specialist dietitians, psychologists, psychiatrists, because there's no one fit for everybody. And so that is, really important. And I'm very fortunate to work in a team like that. And we interact and heavily rely on each other to holistically support each person. And so I realize though that that's not accessible to everybody across
Right.
the world. So I think that's the potential to bring specialists in this space together would be really helpful.
Absolutely. And I do agree with you. It is very hard to have such a incredible service and such an incredible platform and treatment towards everyone. It is inaccessible for many people. But that's
Yeah.
our problem. It's like this whole idea of scaling that personalization, having one person and having almost like you can think of it like five people across them on in a table, being able to help them one-on-one in a specific root cause manner. I wanted to ask, in your practice particularly, how is it that you are able to, for every client, give that personalization and give them that access to your trusted board of medical professionals, like your gastroenterologists and your IBS dietitians, without, I guess, like, I guess, breaking the overall structure? Like, how is it that we're able to, because everyone has limited bandwidths, right? Of course, you only have certain amount of hours a day. So how is it that you're able to, create this offer to a patient that they have access to you as well as these medical professionals, and have that promise to every single client you meet, given that there's a
Mm.
limit on how much service you can do as well as how much service the gastroenterologists that are referred by you can do. Because, to be honest, Claire, that's one of the biggest hurdles that we are facing as CareBiome, being able to scale that personalization, have it so that we're able to give that personalization that people truly deserve, but scale to the nation and internationally. It's very tough because, of course, everyone has limited bandwidths, and as much as you would like to have help, you would like to help. It's very hard to listen and take the time and sit down with, a million people for these, like, 6 sacred sessions. So how is it that maybe, you think I could go about that?
It's a good question, and there are a few layers there. I might start by, I think, first things first, right? I think there are systems that run along in each of our professions where there are things that we can
Right,
systemize and things
right.
that we can't. And I think systemizing those things is
Yeah, yeah,
helpful,
yeah,
right? So systemize
yeah,
what you can, and how we tailor it is obviously depending on who's in front of us, but that might not be how you might think. It's using the language that they're using. It's explaining the gut brain axis in using an example that they would understand. So in terms of, we would probably always start by explaining the gut brain connection and the gut
right.
brain axis, right? But it's how we do it for that person. So, the system is step 1, we do XYZ. The personalization comes in how we might deliver that to that individual.
That makes
Does that make
absolute sense
sense?
because different things resonate with
Yeah,
different people, right? Like, if a person's been in
exactly. Yeah,
healthcare, the way you explain how the gut brain connection to them might be different, as to someone maybe in the military service. They might resonate with different things, and like different things
for
kind of
sure.
hit their heart and brain. So yeah,
For sure. And so I think, and then so there's that, like systems and then personalize from there. But then there's also an order of things in terms of how we would manage someone who's displaying IBS
yeah,
symptoms, right? It wouldn't be the right thing to do for the first healthcare professional someone sees is the clinical
right,
hypnotherapist. That wouldn't make
yeah,
sense, right? So the first step is go to the
right,
gastroenterologist, someone who specializes in functional gut issues, do, you know,
hmm,
work with them, get a proper diagnosis, do the tests, exclude other things. I'm not a gastroenterologist, so that would I don't know exactly, their
Absolutely.
process. But, and then it could be effective for everybody, but it might not be. Maybe people have had a bad experience with a hypnotherapist before, or it's just not something that resonates with them, right? So then it's not gonna be effective, and the same with, a psychologist, for example. That might be effective for some people, that delivery method, and then other people might have, again, had a bad experience with a psychologist, or that's just
Right.
not their style, they'd rather do so this is kind of where the tailoring comes in as well, is that there is we can systemize it to a point and at least have the options of who a person might be able to see and how explain how that might be helpful, but, uh the tailoring comes with who they might prefer to see, and the same with a psychiatrist, they might recommend particular medications at a certain point in someone's journey that could positively impact, and then there are some people who that wouldn't be appropriate for, or they don't want to engage with. Do
Yes.
you know what I
Yes.
mean? And so yeah, it would always start with medical, I would say, and then we branch off from there. And of course, we haven't really talked about it, and I'm not a dietitian or nutritionist, so I won't spend too much time talking about it. But the gut brain connection is a two-way
Yes.
it's a two-way
Absolutely.
highway, right? So what we're putting into our body, of course, it would make sense that that's
Yep.
important as well as what we're putting into our
Yes.
mind, right? So it's important to access, in an ideal world, it would be important to access all of those services. And when we do it would have to be dependent on where the patient's at with their journey.
Makes perfect sense. And it's so interesting because Claire, the way you described it earlier in our conversation, that of course, gut hypnotherapy, that's just a device through which we are, doing that hypnosis. But everyone,
Right.
every gut hypnotherapist has a different style, right? And and in a
Yeah.
similar way, even gastroenterologists, I feel like they come
Yeah.
in and they gain that amazing certification of being a gastroenterologist, but they come from different walks of life and they have different
Yeah.
mindsets. Some might be
Yeah.
right.
Preferences. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
so
right.
it's like some gastroenterologists, knowing that it's a functional disease, they might be like, okay, well, your next step is let's do an elimination diet. Let's do, let's maybe take this medication. Uh, b Whereas
Yeah.
another gastroenterologist might be more prone to being like, "Hey, okay, this is IBS. Thank God you don't have any, structural issues within your intestines, but we have Claire here, and she's gonna be taking it from here, and she's gonna be able to walk through some maybe, mental hurdles we have to be able to alleviate those gut issues." So it's like so
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
interesting because
Yeah.
it's like, we're gonna have to try to, pick, like, diamonds or gems like yourself that, have this holistic viewpoint, but still they have those tools in their arsenal to be able to give the care that a patient needs.
Yeah, and I think it too, in reality, it might be all of those things, right? They might do medication and hypnotherapy,
Yeah,
and it might be rather than an either or situation, it's probably more of a, we'll try several things. I think the thing is that I've been really fortunate to work with a very holistic and
right,
inclusive team, and a very I mean, the evidence is there now. So the scientific evidence is there. We know that clinical hypnotherapy is just as effective as, a low FODMAP diet now that those studies have
right.
been released. And so I actually find the team that I've worked with, are actually really
Good.
open minded, very
Yeah,
inclusive. I mean, the very fact that there is a publicly funded service here in Melbourne, I think demonstrates that holistic. And I often will talk to them and they'll say, well, it gives really good results. So they're very results based. And if the evidence is there, then that's something that
love
they'll
it, love it.
utilize.
Yeah, I feel
In my
And, I feel
experience,
it
yeah.
might be very similar, in America as well, right? Like, at the end of the day, science
Yeah,
is really just, what do the results say? And if the
yeah,
results say that there is
yeah,
a positive effect, then that's definitely on the table for gastroenterologists. So,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, as an option. Yeah, for
Absolutely. So
sure.
yeah, I think for me, like, and I love how you kind of pointed out the first course of action is getting that medical attention. And then
For
after
sure.
that is where the magic happens, where based on the unique position, the mindset and gut issues that person has, from there we're kind of doing a lock and key where we try to personalize the care for them.
Right.
Love it.
Exactly. Yeah. The services and the expertise are all layered around them, and then you just kind of and the timeline of that, again, that's the where the personalization comes in. You know, who what are they struggling most with at that time? And then so then we start there, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Well, Claire, thank you so, so much for all these amazing breakthroughs and all this amazing knowledge and a sneak peek as to how you actively are almost saving lives by, transforming people's mental health. Because I know firsthand how powerful it is when, when we're able to tap into that self-empowerment and we're able to realize we're in control.
Absolutely.
It's literally like you turn into a different human and you're taking different steps.
It's how you become unstuck, right? It's being able to see actually there's so much more that I can do, and with the right guidance, you can hold you can support someone and hold their hand through that process, and that's how you step out of feeling stuck into empowerment, is that you realize, actually, there's so much more that I can be doing, and the positive impact on people's life and their quality of life is real.
Absolutely. And when you were saying that, I just remembered even people without just a functional disorder, but actually even with structural disorders, of course there is a heavier focus on the medical and the traditional medicine side of things, but at the same time there is a
Yeah.
mental aspect as well, if not more. Because they
Mm.
realize that it might be more threatening to their health and their life. And I feel like the care biome that I wish the world will see more and more in the next 3 to 5 years. I really hope we have kind of like a refuge haven for them as well. So, but yeah,
Yeah. I think interestingly, I was looking at some statistics yesterday is that, a lot of people with, inflammatory bowel disease, for example, also have IBS type symptoms, I think in quite a high proportion. And again, it's not necessarily an either or, it can be
right,
both, right? That's probably the approach, is that yes, like you say, in IBD is absolutely a mechanical
yes,
structural issue, but they also there can be elements, like you say, of stress, anxiety, and also IBS type, a disorder, potentially of a disorder of the gut brain interaction as well. And so it kind of opens up the options to help support them and to get them on their way.
absolutely, absolutely, Claire. Thank you so much for all your time. I think the best summary that I could give that I'm gonna walk away with is one, self-empowerment is one of the greatest journeys a person could ever, embark upon, because that is that journey where you're
Mhm.
realizing that you're in the driver's seat, and whatever
Yeah.
happens in life, you are in control, and that taking care of yourself is the best way you can give to others.
Absolutely. It's the only way,
Yeah,
arguably, right? If we don't put that oxygen mask, we're laid down, we're on the floor of the plane, everyone's trying to evacuate, and now we're a burden. And so that's a big one that we also start with, and putting our oxygen masks on first, especially in healthcare and, any in service profession, I guess. But yeah, so true. And being able to, that example you used about getting in the driver's seat is an example I use. Explain to people, right now you're in the back seat of your own
right.
car, and we got to get you in the driver's seat. We can't always control what happens in
Mhm.
our life, right? That's just that is life, but we can control our response to it
Absolutely.
and how we respond, and that's the power, and that's the empowerment piece I try to weave to everything I do with my patients.
Love it. And now that you just mentioned the healthcare aspect, I just needed to add this final note. Another thing that I've really learned from you and that I really hope we can imbibe in CareBiome is just this idea of empowering healthcare professionals. Because the best shot we have at bringing healthcare to the next level is by empowering those that are at the front line helping people.
That needs to go on a T-shirt.
Right? Yeah. That's a whole 'nother business we will start later, Claire, me and you. But yeah.
Yeah,
But I love it.
absolutely.
Like, so another part of CareBiome we wanna do is we saw, like, a lot of IBS dietitians, you were also mentioning it, their role is critical as well because right?
Absolutely.
Like, there's, like, this
Yeah.
directional pathway that you're talking about, and
Yeah,
as you are, healing someone through the mind, these guys are healing people through the gut. But one
absolutely.
one thing I have heard, because I'm lucky to have conversations with IBS dietitians in past episodes, one dietitian, we were speaking with her, and she was saying that, a hurdle I usually have is a lot of the supplements and the medications that my client usually takes, over the counter, like, sorry, not over the counter, but direct to consumer. So there are brands out there like Seed Health and, different gut brands that are very reputable, but because the dietitian itself doesn't know what's in that supplement, they don't understand what is producing a negative or positive effect in their client's
Mm,
health. And so one thing we want
mm,
to do in core biome is have a trusted line of supplements empowering the dietitians so they can have high quality bioavailable single ingredient supplements that they can give to their patients,
mm,
and they can adjust the dosage amount so they're able to know exactly what's
mm.
going on in their patient's body and what's creating an effect, whether it's negative or positive. So yeah, I'm super, super excited about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, as clinicians, to have effective tools that have been tested and, well researched is an important part of our work. And so to have those tools available, I'm sure would be incredibly empowering for clinicians and healthcare
Love
professionals
it,
too.
love it. And because right now we are starting that, but early on we want to have a bit more comprehensive line of supplements. So we're starting just with IBS, and we're doing a lot of we actually partner with a naturopathic doctor who's helping us formulate a supplement, like a gut tonic, so to speak, specifically for IBS, with proven herbs and probiotics that are helping
Oh.
heal and downregulate that nervous system. So I'm really, really
Mm.
excited to share more about that as well in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing it with me, and I obviously wish you all the best with CareBiome and your supplement range as well. And whilst supplementation isn't something that I'm involved in, is outside of my scope, I'm very consciously aware that it takes a village and it takes a team of qualified, collaborative medical healthcare professionals to support a person to unlock their potential and live their best quality of life, so sounds good.
Absolutely. Claire, thank you so much. This conversation is definitely the first of many, many more to come down the line. And
Wonderful.
yeah, thank you so much
Great.
for all your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.